Yes.
When you talked about political will, well, we'll talk about some of these, agencies you mentioned,
Yes.
and then the laws that will probably come in place to ensure that this is seamless. But you talked about political will, and that's an expression that you hear time and again. It's like a buzz term. What does this really mean? Because if political will was a major factor in us deregulating or not, then it means that whatever it is we want to do moving forward, we need that political will. Do you see that political will present now?
Well, I think that if you ask me, the political will should be there. I mean, President Buhari is on his last legs, so we expect he's not going to do Donald Trump on us. And so if it's going to go, that's when you expect somebody to be able to take real hard decisions. And really, it was a hard decision. So you just let the market drive the thing.
But we had this suggestion. In fact, it was an announcement. You recall the reaction that followed that announcement, the protests, the Occupy Nigeria protests. Was that not political will then?
Well, the political will is that people, it happens every time when you see that you're going to go to, but that means, let me give you a classic case of political will. So you say you buy an Okada in Lagos, and then you find that elections are going to come. And you find it's going to impact, it's going to affect you negatively. And so the political will is that there's going to be, prices would go up. And so now the inflation would come. And it's going to make us unpopular. It's going to affect our attractiveness amongst the electorate. That's the political will. And so by the time you begin to put that, you put that ahead of you as you want to take a decision, then you're saying to yourself, how is this going to impact, how is it going to affect us? Yeah. And so that's the issue. That's when you talk about political wills. But you want to know the right decision to take. And the essence of good governance is that you should take that decision and stand by it. Okay. And even if it's going to impact negatively on you on the short run, but you are looking at being a statesman, and looking at taking a fairly long-term interest of the country.
Well, Mr. Chizia, I'd like you to speak to, because what we have seen over the years is that every fuel price is like a hybrid of sorts. It always creates a chain reaction across the economy, and it's almost instant. But before we go to that angle, what do you make of this bit of confusion? On the one hand, when the Pengasan announced a strike, there was that apprehension that there was going to be fuel scarcity at the pumps. Then NNPC came out and said, there is no cause for alarm. We still have 2.9 billion liters of fuel in store. And then the price of fuel, of petrol, was increased. And almost immediately, with the landing cost was announced, and then, naturally, the fuel price was increased at the pumps. Is it the same fuel that we have in reserve that is being increased immediately, or help us understand?
But that's what has happened. When you announce a price increase, even at the pump price, those who operate the pumps, once you announce an increase in price, they capitalize. It's a human tendency, except somebody is going to track these things and make sure it doesn't happen. So if there's a price increase, they want to capitalize. And so if I have products in stock that I got at the previous price, I want to sell it and capitalize, so make a killing. But for instance, if there's a reduction in price.
So sorry, on that you just mentioned something. Yes. So that means that no one can hold anyone responsible for taking advantage of the people.
Well, sometimes that's why we talk about market forces. Sometimes if you want to place those things, it's not very easy to do. So you have your petroleum products and marketing company that should be able to check these things and so on, and say, well, you have this product, you should be able to sell it and so. But I don't know if they have the capability, they have the resources to say, look, you have so much products in stock while this announcement was made, and you should be able to exhaust this. I don't think they have that.
So this is not political will. This is now...
No. Well, it's people trying to capitalize. People are trying to take advantage. People are trying to say, look, it's human tendency. Human tendency, there's nothing you can do about it. So if I see that I'm going to make some money, going this way,
But what should government tendency be if that is human tendency?
Well, government tendency should be to make sure that people play by, play the game by the rules. So if government is not, the thing to say is that when you want to enforce these things and you want to police and take off, how many filling stations do you have in this country? Let's look at the practicability of doing it. How many filling stations? And some of them are in very far-flung parts of this country. And so how do you monitor? How are you going to monitor? The only thing you have to do is to maybe come and show some very strong examples, so make some scapegoats and so on, put the fear of God in some of the operators, and so that they know that if they are caught, there are consequences. But for that, it's a very difficult thing to do. And so it's something that's why, as often we talk about allowing the market, to drive the thing.
Some have also alleged that this market that you just talked about now is occupied by some people who are fronts for some government officials who themselves own or have interests in these businesses. Now, that is definitely not something that can be confirmed, but that's the word on the street. If that is word on the street, that perception is reality as far as some people are concerned. They do not have facts otherwise on that one. So that means that we're within the devil and the deep blue sea?
Yeah, but then to the extent that government is not coming in to provide subsidy, so that some consumers will be shortchanged in the process. But so we have the market, and you allow the oil marketers, the majors, to import the products, to sell their products, and so they will take advantage in some extent. But you have a regulator, so when you have a deregulated market, what is going to be important is that somebody who is overlooking to ensure that people don't collude, so don't collude, and then want to check the consumers, to cleaners and so on and so forth. So you have to do that. But so if you have a market and government, the problem with fuel importation in this country is the subsidy payment. The amount of money that went into subsidy, most of it, of course, unaccounted for because it was not budgeted. And so NNPC earns money and then deducts what it pays. And that was why it was possible for for so much corruption to have been perpetrated through that process.
So,
Yes.
pardon me. So
Yes.
you don't buy, because you mentioned importing, allow them import and sell. So you don't buy this suggestion by players in the industry that it shouldn't just be the NNPC importing. How about you allow others import so it can be a bit competitive?
But do you know why NNPC started importing? Because in NNPC, the oil marketers say we can't import at this rate. And it's the same subsidy mentality. The oil marketers say, look, if you want us to import, we're going to import. But we can't import. Obviously, we are in business to make some money. And you say we should import, and you're giving us terms and conditions. And those terms and conditions, if we go and import on those terms, we certainly will be in business. And so when that happened, there's going to be a crisis. So NNPC took over and started importing.
So in some sense, there's still some sort of subsidy in that area, right?
Yes, but you see also as economics, and one has been around for quite some time, a subsidy is not the way to go. It's a misallocation of resources. If you're going to subsidize, you subsidize production. And so people are having issues with producing items and so on, so you try and assist them, to increase their production. But once you put subsidy, it's going to be misapplied. It's going to be hijacked. That is certain.
But there are different views here. So there's a government saying, well, this subsidy regime is not working. In fact, it's putting, too much money in the hands of a few that already have enough. But for the people, they look at the price at the pumps and they go, so this is actually eating into my disposable income all the more. And for them, it doesn't make sense, because imagine they had 500 naira. And before, they could at least spare some nairas to buy other things. But now, they need to buy fuel. So they have reduced disposable income. How do you think we can link that? Because clearly, there's that divide.
I think there are two things to say. Subsidy has never worked, no matter what you do. So the subsidy is no-go area. And of course, you're right. For the average consumer, he's interested, so he goes to buy fuel, he wants some stability in prices. And so the price increases, it affects its purchasing ability to purchase. Yeah. And when you're talking of a regime where it's not just an increase coming from just one area. You know, I live in an area where electricity tariff has just been increased by 100%. 100%.
Oh, that's the band A and band, not the other bands.
And so that means, you know, normally I would charge my meter at 20K. Now I have to do 40. And then if you look at the terms and they were given, there were terms that were given for this hike in price in terms of stability of supplies and so on and so forth. And sometimes they're not even up to it. And so the consumer in Nigeria is at the receiving end. And so they distribute some free meters and so on and so forth. Sorry, I'm taking us off. Yeah, distribute free meters and so on and so forth. And then people are suffering all over the place. And so you take electricity, now you take petroleum, and then of course you also had a pandemic. We know what the pandemic has done to people, the capacity to earn across board. But it's small and middle scale enterprises.
Yeah.
That should be the engine rooms that should drive this economic activities in this environment. How they've suffered from the pandemic.
And they are still suffering from not just a pandemic, but this economic pandemic, if I can use that term. Because really, I mean, just as you have said, disposable income, is being depleted even further because they do not go to banks for loans. They use some of their disposable incomes as loans that they put into their businesses and recycle for as long as possible. Now that is being depleted with the fuel price increase, with electricity tariff increase, and the entire value
inflation
chain.
Too.
Inflation is going on there.
14%.
Yeah. So now with all those figures and this fuel price hike, which effect some believe we have not begun to feel, which effect hasn't quite taken root. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think it is tough, for the average person, and I think that that is why I think that government should really take the proper lesson from the NSAS crisis protest. I don't think we're taking appropriate lessons. I think we should take appropriate lessons. I think that going after people who supported the protest, let me put it here bluntly, the protest was supported, was welcomed by most Nigerians. And that's a fact. Unfortunately, first of all, most Nigerians were thrilled that we would see that sort of protest being organized in our lifetime. But the protest that was peaceful, was well organized, and there were no destructions and so on and so forth. And then people felt that it was bad time because the impunity in the land was walking on four legs. I needed to show, because that what could do was that people should know that you cannot just go and do whatever you wanted to do. And so if you're the president and you have the National Assembly in your pocket and then you felt I could do anything and nobody's going to say anything. And so, but we must take an appropriate lesson that this has happened and that it could happen. But from the response one is getting, it doesn't seem as if this message has sunk in. It's a good thing that the president is saying. It's good sound bites. The president is saying that the protest will not happen again. I want to believe him. But if we're not careful, it's not just making the right pronouncements, saying the right things, good sound bites, and so on and so forth, that will make the protest not to happen again.
You need to actually see some things being done.
Yes, this is what to be done. Things have been done. For instance, Lagos State government says the former people have been governors in the state. Their pensions are going to be reviewed and so on. You see, please, and you see things happening. The crisis in the land is because the economy is not the economy. It was not growing.
Well, there's something you said the other time, Mr. Chizia, yes. And that's the fact that, and many people believe that, and government is working along that line, which is subsidy does not work.
Yes.
Now, let's assume that we have saved some money from that subsidy. Yeah. One would expect that money saved from subsidy should be put directly into infrastructure development to, as you said, boost productivity. Do you see that happening?
Well, I think that's one things we can put money into. I think that also we need to, looking at our budgeting process, looking at budgeting hits, and looking at things that our budgeting should be pro-poor. You see, what's caused this crisis is the fact that the poverty in the land was enormous. So there's too much poverty in the land. And so, consciously, as I was just saying, we're talking about making sure that this doesn't happen again. And we're looking at budget 2021. And so we should be looking at budget heads like health, education. And put good money is there. The monies we put in health, for instance, UNESCO says you should put about 26% of your budget in health. And probably we are doing about 5%. So those are the crises. And of course, modernizations would not happen if we really want to bite the bullet and do what we are supposed to do. We have to be thinking of restructuring this economy. It's not too about it.
Restructuring the economy.
Yes. Restructure the economy, restructure the way the incentive, the resources are shared, the incentive schemes, and so on and so forth. It's resource control. I was trying to avoid using that word. So you have to we have to go back. If you don't do that, you have some crisis. Look, you have this situation whereby National Assembly, the amount of money that goes to National Assembly, of them, there were 400 and something persons there, 100 and something billion naira. That's overhead, goes to National Assembly. And you have your budget for health for 200 million people, for something billion naira. How do you bring that justice? And then, for instance, then National Assembly, if you are talking of reviewing the Constitution, there are those that would lead the process. And then, so are you going to see them and let this happen? If, for instance, why should we have a House of Assembly, have a Senate, and so on and so forth? Why should legislating in Nigeria be almost a permanent job? Shouldn't be.
But I like you to emphasize a little bit and perhaps expatiate on what you said about improving our production capacity. You've talked about the paucity of activities in the micro, small, and medium enterprises sector, given the state of the economy, the pandemic, economic crunch, unemployment, poverty rate, and all of that. Most of the work really that needs to be done in that sector are more artisanal and, basically in the interior Nigeria, the rural areas and all of that. So, which is why the question of infrastructure to boost production came to mind. What do you think we need to do, especially in the interior? Or is it because we do not have a different focus for our economy? Different focus from oil? Is it because it's only one?
Well, I think that to a large extent, the fact that we're overly dependent on oil is part of the crisis. We'll go back to 1986 when we had the structural adjustment program. The point about that program was to diversify the economic base of this country. The issue, the fact that this country has been dependent on oil and that it's not good for us for that to happen, it's known by everybody. But we try to diversify, and that is not happening.
Why is it difficult?
Well, that's a problem. Part of that problem again is leadership, and part of the leadership issue we have in this country is the leadership selection process. So how do you select your leaders? Now, how come, for instance, all these youths who are going about, we're praying that we hope they will get involved in governance beyond the protest. We would want to see them in 2023, maybe float a political party. And that would be the way to go. And they have the numbers. Let's have people who have a passion, who have vision, you see, when you go through a process whereby for you to get into governance, there are certain conditions you have to satisfy. So you must have either you have a deep pocket or you have some people who are sponsoring you. And once you get into power, then your allegiance is to those who sponsored you. Or the money you spent, and you're going to try and recuperate this money. You don't have allegiance, to the country. You don't have allegiance to the people. Then you have your electoral process. Again, it's being cleaned up. We see it's being cleaned up. Mahmoud, who's the chairman, has just been renewed. To some extent, it's been a fairly good job. Now you clean up the electoral process. Let's digitalize it. Let's automate it, and so that we clean up the place, so that people's vote would count.
You know, on a final note, it's interesting that we have literally touched on different. We even touched on health. Talk about that budget.
Yes.
Well, the ministry will tell you, well, we have more than 35 billion. We have, 300 billion also for recurrent and what have you. But on a final note, regarding this fuel price hike, Nigerians thinking. So, what's the way out? Is there any making this easier for Nigerians? If we could just end on that note. The fuel price, the tariffs, and all that. Is there a way to make this easier on Nigerians?
Well, unfortunately, I was just coming, a friend of mine just sent me a message saying, Sonny Rabo, sent me a message saying that the rate of exchange has gone up to so much, and do I see it coming down? I said, no, I don't see it coming down, because let's not live in denial, because the foreign exchange is not coming in. And so when you look at the demands are not supportable. And so, and to the extent that we are so dependent on importation, we consume what we don't have, more or less. We have issues. And so the price, they are going up. So what is government going to do? So we need to broaden the safety net. The safety net is a way to go. I think that we need to begin to, these palliative things we are doing, I think that we need to take it to the next step. So we want begin to have things like unemployment benefits. So might not be able to go at the deep end and say, look, everybody who's unemployed, if you don't have a job, you've been entitled to so much payment. That's the way to go. And we might start to say, let's start with graduates. So you leave the university, you've done your NYSC.
That's palliatives 2.0.
Well, this is really an unending conversation, because, clearly, from what you have said now, the fuel price is a hydra-headed issue. It touches virtually every sphere of our lives. So I guess we keep our eyes open and our ears to the ground. Yes. I have to thank you very much
for
being a part of this conversation. Boniface Chizia is an economist. All right, we're back in a moment for another thing. To stay with us.